Hey guys, Lewis here from thelanguagescientist.com, and in today's video I want to talk about how to improve your listening comprehension. So if you're like me, I had to learn English because French is my first language, and so I learned, English in school. When I got out of school, I did a lot of studying. I thought pretty good at English. I could speak, certainly, but I was really struggling with listening comprehension. I could not understand most of the stuff that people were, telling me. Like maybe on, one-on-one conversations with native speakers, if they, would speak slowly and stuff, I could understand. But then, you get to like just movies in English without subtitles or, group conversations with background noise. I was completely, I didn't understand what was happening. In my view, listening comprehension really is sort of a true test of your language ability, because when you're speaking to someone, it doesn't really tell a lot about what your level really is, because if you don't know a certain word, if you don't know a certain phrase, you can always find ways to express that in a different way. When you're reading, you can look up words and phrases in a dictionary. You can ask someone. When you're writing, you can actually look up words and you can pause and sort of think about what you want to say. You can find ways around all of these things, with writing, reading, and speaking. But with listening, in most cases, if you're in a group conversation, you can't just tell the other person to wait, stop, can you repeat? I mean, you can do that a few times, but it gets pretty annoying. So listening is really the true test of your language ability, no matter what kind of language you're trying to learn. And so I'm going to give you some of my own experience, as well as some of the information I got from reading the research on language acquisition. The first thing is my own experience. My own experience certainly has been that the biggest problem with listening comprehension actually doesn't have a lot to do with listening comprehension itself. So the number one reason why you can't understand whatever language you're trying to learn is not because you're lacking listening skills. It may be the case, but the number one reason is you don't know the words, you don't know the vocabulary, you don't know the phrases. And so I think people don't realize the extent to which a certain lack of vocabulary actually leads to them not understanding what is being said. This is the biggest challenge as far as listening. So vocabulary, a lot of people sort of don't think that this is a priority, but I've talked about this in many other videos. Vocabulary is really just because of the sheer amount of word families and different sort of contexts in which a particular word can be used. It's a huge challenge. So tip number one, to improve your listening comprehension, you need to get your vocabulary up to a level where you can, it's not a challenge anymore. So just to give you some guidelines, in Paul Nation, so Paul Nation is a researcher. He's retired, but he was a researcher in second language acquisition, vocabulary acquisition, that kind of stuff. He said that, if I remember correctly, I think it was you need to know at least the 6,000 most common word families in order to be able to understand a movie in whatever language it is that you're trying to learn. So 6,000 word families. This is a lot, and this is something that you're going to, if you're just learning a language by yourself, you're going to need to adopt the right strategies. And I've talked about this in the past. I'm just going to talk about some of the best strategies to acquire vocabulary here. So there are two ways, sort of two broad paths that you can use to acquire vocabulary. The first is sort of explicit vocabulary learning. The second one is what is called incidental vocabulary learning. Now, the two are complementary. It's not like you have to choose one or the other over the other. You need to do both. So explicit vocabulary learning is stuff like you're explicitly you're doing activities to learn vocabulary. So like doing, word flashcards and that type of stuff. Learning vocabulary lists and those types of things. And then incidental vocabulary learning is going to be, reading and listening. You stumble upon certain words and you can, guess them out of context, or they're explained to you, and then this is incidental learning. You can actually acquire some of those words. The good thing with explicit vocabulary learning, so like flashcards and stuff like that, is that it has been proven to be much more efficient than incidental learning. If you spend 1 hour doing explicit learning versus 1 hour of incidental learning, the 1 hour of explicit learning is going to result in a lot more vocabulary acquisition than just, incidental learning. The problem is, to me, there are two issues here, is that, with explicit learning, you don't have enough time and, to be honest, enough motivation to actually go through those 6,000 word families and learn them all. Some people are going to be able to do this, but this is really, really hard. It takes a very, very long time, and most people do not have what it takes to get there. And this is not a criticism, this is just, reality. It's just too hard, too long, and there's not enough material to really show you all of the different forms of a particular word family, and the different contexts in which it can be used, the different inflections and so on. So explicit vocabulary learning, very effective, very efficient, but you need to complement it with incidental vocabulary learning, which is essentially just reading and listening to stuff that is about at your level. So to give you an example of what you can do here, I don't necessarily recommend that you go out there and just, listen to stuff in whatever language you're trying to learn, or read stuff in that language. This is not going to be very effective because you're not going to understand a lot. What you can do, for example, you can use a tool. I always recommend this tool called Link, and I will put the URL, the link to the tool called Link in the description of this video. But essentially what it allows you to do is take texts in the language you're trying to learn and decipher them little by little. So like you just click on words that you don't know, it's going to tell you the translation. You can translate sentence by sentence and so on. You can also do a lot of listening on there. It's going to read you some texts. It also has a lot of lessons that are adapted to whatever level you're currently at with the language that you're trying to learn. So Link is really a great tool for incidental vocabulary learning. The thing is, with Link, when you read stuff, you can click on the words, and it's going to save those words to a database where you can actually do flashcard activities and stuff like that. So it kind of does both explicit and incidental vocabulary acquisition. So I'll put a link in the description if you want to check it out. But the point here is, you need to do explicit vocabulary learning and incidental vocabulary learning if you want to improve your listening comprehension, because vocabulary is going to be the #1 roadblock for most people. Okay, now let me get into my second point, which is, well, once you have that initial sort of vocabulary, which is actually a lot of vocabulary, you need a lot of it, there's definitely a sense in which the actual listening is preventing you from actually understanding what is being said. And I'm going to break this down into two parts. Number one, there is the actual listening, meaning that you may know the word, you may know the phrases, but when they're being, said out loud, you don't recognize them. You can't recognize them because you don't know the pronunciation. You haven't done enough listening. And the second part is you lack sort of fluency in listening. So meaning that if the words are pronounced in a way that is very clear, like textbook style, and sort of slow, then you're going to recognize them and understand them. But when they're said in a native context, at a native speed or a fast speed, and with maybe slang in it, maybe some mistakes in it, like native sort of mistakes, with some background noise, you're not going to recognize them. So the first issue is just pure listening. So what do you do to actually get your you know the vocabulary, but you can't really recognize them when they're told, when certain things are said to you. Well, here the solution, one activity that is proposed in the Paul Nation has a book, is simply if you can if you can watch a movie or something on Netflix, for example, download the script first and decipher the script, read it. So you can use Link, for example. Again, there's a link in the description, but Link has this Chrome extension that allows you to just, you can just click on it, and if you're watching something on Netflix, or I think YouTube, I haven't tried it with YouTube, but certainly Netflix, it works, you can download the subtitles of that particular episode into Link and then read the script beforehand. And what this allows you to do is, well, you know what to expect in that episode, and then you can go on and watch it with the subtitles. Now, another thing that you can do to improve your listening, and that has worked wonders for me, is simply watching things with subtitles. So if you're trying to learn, say, Chinese, you just put something in Chinese on Netflix and put the Chinese subtitles with it. Science has shown, and this is one of the activities suggested by Dr. Paul Nation, is watching a movie with the subtitles. So listening while reading is going to lead to greater gains than if you were just to watch and listen without the subtitles. This is definitely a legit way of learning, of improving your listening comprehension. Okay, now let me get into the last point, which is, as I said, some people know the vocabulary and they know they can recognize what is being said to them, but when it comes to actual native speed, if people talk to them at a natural rate, maybe in a group conversation with some background noise, they're not going to be able to understand. The listening comprehension lacks fluency. So this is something that in the research it's referred to as, like, you need to do fluency development, and fluency in this case simply means that there is a time component. So if you're not able to actually recognize the words that are the whatever speech is being told to you at a native speed, you lack fluency in listening. Here, the sort of generic way to train this would be to add a time component to your training when you're doing listening. In terms of practical activities that you can do, again, I would recommend that you download the subtitles of, like, whatever Netflix show you're watching and read them in advance. Read those subtitles in advance, and then you watch whatever episode it is that you're going to watch. So that's pretty much it on how to improve your listening comprehension. Now, I want to add a last thing for people who stayed until the end. I'm currently making an app that is going to greatly improve your listening. It's not just for listening, but it's for language learning, but it's based around listening, because for longtime viewers of this channel, that I'm all about listening, just because it's so practical. It's not necessarily that it is superior, but it's so practical and you can do it on the go. So the app I'm making, and I sort of hesitate to call it an app because there's so many language learning apps out there. It's just like kind of gimmicky and all that. The idea of this app, and I don't know what I'm going to call it. If you want to, suggest some names, be free to just suggest some names in the description. But the idea of this app is going to be that, essentially you can learn a lot by listening. Okay, so that has been established. I've talked about that many times. You can learn a lot by listening, and it doesn't cost you anything if you just listen in your car while going to work or while working out and stuff. I really like this idea. The problem is that people listen to something, maybe once or twice, but it is not enough. You don't get enough repetitions of the same words, of the same phrases, of the same, content for that material to actually get into your long-term memory. And this is a huge problem. This means that a lot of the listening that people do is actually wasted because they don't get enough what is called recyclings of the same items to actually let those items become engraved in their minds in the long term. So the idea of this app is simply to take the audio, and so you download whatever, like a Netflix show and like an MP3 version of that episode, just the audio version. You would put it into the app, you would upload it through an interface, and then the app is going to tell you, okay, well, on this day you need to re-listen to this particular episode. You can do this with podcasts, you can do this with audio lessons, you can do this with pretty much any sort of movie or audio file that you're listening to. You upload it into the app and it's going to tell you exactly when you need to listen to it using an intelligent algorithm. This is like an SRS, a spaced repetition system for audio files. And the main advantage is that, well, you can just do it on the go. It's very convenient. And so I'm currently making this because, you know, I'm a software developer, so I'm doing the mobile version and the web version. So that's it for this video on how to improve your listening comprehension. If you have any questions, then leave a comment in the comment section. See you next time.